few nights ago, my daughter and I were at home together. It was just us girls because my son, my nephew who lives with us, and my boyfriend were out. The night was cold and rainy. My daughter was in the kitchen baking, and I was chatting with her for a bit. I realized that it was getting late, a little after 10 p.m., so I decided to go take a shower. I went into my bathroom and got in the shower, and I just turned the water on when I heard my daughter calling me in a hushed but frantic tone. I threw on my robe and came out of my bedroom. She told me that someone was on the deck knocking on the door. This was very strange for a few reasons, but especially because you have to come all the way into my yard and around the side of the house to get to the deck. I was immediately alarmed. It was late. We weren't expecting anyone, and any normal person would go to the front door. The door to the deck is solid, but there's a window right next to it. I peeked through the window and saw a large man with his hood up. He was carrying a bag. He had just started knocking again. I said, "Hello?" And he responded, "Yes, can you open the door, please?" I asked, "Who are you looking for?" He said, "Can you please open the door so that we can talk?" I repeated more sternly, "Who are you looking for? Do you know someone who lives here?" He said, "I'm looking for a woman. Are you a mother? Please just open the door." At this point, I was ready to call the police, but realized that I had left my phone in the bathroom. My daughter was standing nearby, watching all of this happen with a very worried look on her face. I shouted, "You need to leave right now." He didn't reply, but he continued to stand at the door in silence for what felt like forever. I whispered to my daughter, "Go grab my phone from the bathroom," and just then he walked towards the stairs to leave. I ran into the living room, which has a window that faces the front of the house, and watched as he walked out of the yard. It dawned on me that the deck is attached to the kitchen, and he could have been watching us through the window before he started knocking. We were so shaken. When the guys came home, we told them what happened. They were as concerned as we were. My nephew happens to be a police officer. They immediately went outside to search the yard, but the strange guy was long gone. We're buying external cameras for the house this weekend. Starting last December, my neighborhood has been having issues with finding burnt grass and ashes, scraps of black clothing, and the occasional mutilated dead animal on the soccer field behind the pool, usually around the end of each month. Some people were upset, but I think most of us, including me, just chalked it up to some idiot teenagers who think it's funny to scare the neighborhood. I'm not so sure of that anymore. Before I went to bed, I randomly decided to go down to the pool to catch a few Pokemon on Pokemon Go. I went down after 10 p.m., and it was uneventful until I decided to leave. That's when a dark minivan pulled into the parking lot, down on the other side from me. Thinking it was one of the other regulars, I sat down at a bench and waited for them. But 6 figures jumped out of the car and gathered near the trunk, and my heart rate jumped as I realized they were all wearing black cloaks. I thought about how cliche this all was, until I realized I was in the open, and I jumped behind the nearby hedgerow that covers the exit. I heard them chatting as they opened the trunk, and even though their speech was muffled, I definitely heard, "Yes, I have the ritual knife, and he is bringing the dog soon." As soon as I heard that, I turned and snuck into the woods and made my way home. I checked behind me every 5 seconds on my trip home. I made it home without being trailed and locked my house tight, but I'm still sleeping with my baseball bat next to me, at least for the next few nights. Update. I went there this morning and didn't find anything, but it smells like rotting flesh. The police have been notified, but I doubt anything will come of it. I will make sure the HOA install cameras in the parking lot though, and obviously know it's not a real satanic cult. It's just a bunch of dumb a-holes who run around in the woods at night and hurt animals to scare people and feel better about their pathetic lives. That's not to say they're not dangerous. Sometimes, but mostly they're just losers. Last year I was feeling really down because of an impending breakup. That is, I knew he was about to break up with me. I decided to go for a long drive, ended up somewhere a few hours north, around the Georgia-South Carolina border. My biggest mistake was that I didn't want him to contact me, so I left my phone in my apartment. After stopping at a little diner, getting a good meal and taking some time to read by myself in a little park, I was feeling a little bit better, but not much. I decided to go home and face what needed to be faced, and figured back home was the same way I came. I ended up crossing over a really dusty bridge, came to sort of a dirt road surrounded by overgrown tall grass that was quite literally off the map. That is, the second I crossed this bridge, my Jeep's navigation got scrambled, but I saw something up ahead, so I kept on the road, figuring if I could get near civilization again, my GPS would start working. When I finally came to the thing up ahead, it was the most surreal and bizarre experience I've had in a while. It looked like maybe a church, as it appeared to have a steeple, but the entire building was burnt to a crisp, literally black from fire with a lot of holes and crumbling architecture. It was tiny too, like it could fit maybe 10 people at most. It was surrounded by weird junk, a bicycle tire, a spindle, didn't even know anyone used those anymore, old lawn chairs, and most creepy, a half-burnt doll. There was no church on any map, and I don't know. I just got that awful feeling in the pit of my stomach, not to mention it was about to rain, and I really wanted to get back home. I turned around and went back to the park, and finally got some directions back from a nice older couple. I looked it up on Google Maps later, and there is no church anywhere near where I thought I was. Has anyone else seen this? Does anyone know what this was? When I was in the 8th grade, I was significantly innocent, out of touch, and a naive girl. The most vulnerable I'd been was on the daily 12-minute walks to and from school. That particular sunny winter afternoon was like any other. I was minding my business, didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen on my walk home. For context, the street that I live on is a relatively quiet New York City street. If I walked in the opposite direction of my home, turned right at the end of the street and kept going straight, I'd come up on a big intersection. Since the intersection is so close to my street, I still had close access to a crowd, or people in general, but our street was mildly quiet. There were the occasional few people passing by every few minutes, and sometimes it would be empty for a while because someone else passed. Unfortunately, when I turned left onto my street, it was empty at the time. It often is, so I didn't think much of it and kept on going. I'm about 2 minutes from home when I notice this man coming towards me from the direction of my house. He's not approaching me, he's just walking towards the street that I'd just come from. He's bald, white, and looks to be in his 30s. Since there were only a few apartment buildings on our block, and he had somewhat of a familiar face, I had a feeling I'd seen him in our building before. By the time I realized this, we'd made eye contact, but he's walked right past me. Even though people in New York City are known to be cold and unbothered, the people in our building are generally nice, always say hi and hold the door open for others. It's considered rude not to say hi in our building. I'm still unsure if he does indeed live in our building, and yet feel slightly bad for not saying hi, so I make the mistake of turning my head back to get a better look at him. As it turns out, he also turned back to look at me, but unlike me, he stops walking and walks back over to me. I'm pretty taken aback since, even though not saying hi was considered rude, it wasn't out of sorts enough for him to walk back over to me. At best, I'd maybe seen him once before, if at all. He begins by asking how I am. I tell him I'm good and ask if I've seen him before. He says, I have a familiar face and look like the sister of his friend, Christine. Immediate red flag because the only reason I was talking to him was because I thought he lived in my building, which didn't seem to be the case. I'm thinking, okay, I'll just say bye and be on my way. No. He asks my name and I'm so caught off guard by the whole interaction that I stupidly tell him. My name is uncommon enough for someone who figures it out how to spell it to be able to find me easily, but too uncommon for people to spell it on the first try. The man then asks how old I am, and that's another red flag. I was sheltered, but not enough to not know that the question is super problematic from a grown man. I can't remember, but I think I told him, figured it would get him off my back. It didn't. He asks if I have a phone, which I'm literally clutching in my jacket's pocket, hoping he won't see. I immediately lie, finally getting it together and denying having one. As he's talking, I notice his eyes have red rims. At the time, I thought he was drunk, but I doubt it now, since he wasn't completely out of it. He just looked like he hadn't slept much and was tired. He asks if there's a number he can contact me with, and I again say no because I don't have one. The man looks around and asks where I'm headed, so I tell him I'm heading home. Then he asks where I live, so I tell him a street that's far enough away, but not too near my house, but also not too far from him to be suspicious. He points out how that's a long walk. I'm directionally challenged and thought it was 20 minutes, but better be safe than sorry. He asks me how he can contact me or when he can see me next. At this point, I've had it with courtesy and I just shake my head and say, I'm sorry, I can't do this. At that exact moment, a few people turn on my street and I take the opportunity to book it home. I glance back maybe 1 to 2 times to see if he's there, but I'm so shocked, can't bring myself to care, and just walk home. This encounter scared me for a whole week, since I usually returned home around the same time around the same route, give or take a few minutes, and it would be easy for him to find me if he really wanted to. I was also worried he'd seen which building I live in. For a while I'd look over my shoulder often while walking home, and getting spooked if there was a man dressed in black behind me. For some background, I'm male in my late 20s, living in northern Canada. Last weekend I got a call from a friend telling me that while on his Ski-Doo ride, he went by my cabin as it was on his route, and it looked like someone broke into, smashed out all of the windows. Devastated, I went out to my shed to load up my Ski-Doo and sled boards and tarps to repair the windows. I was trying to keep some of the snow out of my cabin until I could properly replace the windows in the spring. Just as I was about to leave, I got this gut feeling that something was wrong, and that I should take a rifle just in case. It's always better to be safe than sorry. As I started my ride into the woods, I noticed the sky getting darker, and I think to myself, great, now I'll have a storm to deal with. Luckily, it wasn't a snowstorm, but a thick fog that rolled in fast. There is nothing more unsettling than being alone in the woods, encased in a thick fog, especially with God knows what's around you. I finally get to my cabin, and sure enough, all of my windows are smashed. I unload my gear and get to work, trying to get my cabin secure as fast as I can, and then get the hell out of Dodge. At some point I feel like I'm being watched, which gives me a lump in my throat because I can't see anything in this fog. I hear something moving through the trees and automatically grab my rifle, put my back to the cabin, hoping that if something comes out of the fog, I'll be ready for it. My first thought was, it was the asshole who broke into my cabin, coming back under the cover of fog to see what else they could take. But then I realized that no Ski-Doo approached me, as I would have heard one miles away, as it was so quiet out here. After waiting a while with no more noises coming from the woods, I go back to work, get my windows fixed, and return back to my Ski-Doo to get the hell out of there. After a short ride, I noticed something that looks like potholes in the middle of the trail. Turns out it was polar bear tracks leading towards my cabin. That creepy feeling of being watched and the noises from the woods was a polar bear stalking me and was the actual culprit of the break at my cabin. What disturbs me most is that I would never see it coming with all that fog on that day, and my rifle would be practically useless against such a big animal. To this day, I feel lucky to be alive. Nearly 2 years ago, my husband and I moved to a pretty safe town. We decided to have some fun while we're young and child-free, so we got an apartment downtown. It's super fun. It's on top of a shopping center with restaurants, boutiques, a theater, all kinds of stuff. We've had a blast living here and have always felt very safe. I like to go on walks. Since the area is so busy, I've always just walked here when I'm alone. I go on a walk about every other day, unless it's winter. Anyway, for 2 years I've seen this older man sitting in the shopping center. He always gave me a really bad feeling, so if I came upon him I tried to divert my path, but I felt bad for judging. I said, maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe he's old and lonely and wants to be out around people. Well, the other night there was a shooting in the shopping center. It was around 10 at night, and I never go out that late by myself, so I didn't even know about it until the next morning, it turns out. The same older man had kidnapped a woman in the shopping center at gunpoint, assaulted her, and tried to drive away with her. Her husband drove after them and shot the guy. She was rescued and the man is now in jail. He admitted to the police that he'd been stalking that shopping center for victims, watching the women around there. I cannot tell you how many times in the last 2 years I've crossed paths with that man, how many times I've felt guilty for feeling uncomfortable around him, how many times I was right in his path, an easy target. Always trust your gut. Always. I used to date a lawyer a few years back, and he owned and ran this motel. The motel is located about 40 minutes from my historic county. Being a lawyer, he often allowed some of his clients that were on probation to stay there if they were homeless. That gave his clients on probation a means of providing a stable address for court purposes and for the safety of those clients. One of those clients had happened to have grown close to the lawyer. You see, they had both their spouses leave them after so many years, so this shared heartbreak bonded them. They would usually be seen sitting and drinking together on the motel's front patio, lamenting about their lost wives. Well, as you know, the lawyer's friend was there because he was indeed on probation and needed a place to stay for that very reason. He was on probation for the same reason a lot of people in these small rural communities are, drug charges. But the guy had been pretty much complying as far as drug testing and random searches were concerned. After a long week of dealing with probation and his own clients, lack of concern obeying their probationary terms, the lawyer was exhausted and sick of it all. So naturally, the lawyer was both perplexed and irritated upon receiving a call that his friend had failed to come in that day for his drug test, and that he wasn't there in his motel room when probation came and knocked. This was the lawyer's friend's recent pattern of behavior, but he had been known to pull that sort of stuff in the recent past. Exasperated and generally annoyed after his long week, the lawyer knocked only once before entering using his master key. The lawyer gave a sigh of exasperation as he stared into the pitch blackness of the room before him. As he was carefully feeling his way over to one of the bedside lamps, an odd smell caught his attention. The faint smell of chemicals, and maybe iron. Flipping on the lamp switch, the lawyer blinked into the sudden brightness and looked around the room, but his breath caught in his throat as soon as he looked behind him on the bed. There on the double bed lay his friend, obviously passed away. The iron smell that emanated from the body was that of blood and fluid. He estimated that his friend had probably been laying there for at least 2 days dead. I remember him calling me very upset, after of course first dialing 911. For a few weeks we eagerly awaited the autopsy results. When they came back, they weren't a shocker. The lawyer's friend was on probation for drug charges, so it was kind of expected that his death had to do with such. The man's heart had failed as well as his kidneys. Years of prolonged drug use and ignorance to the doctor's warnings had finally cost him his life. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. If you want your true scary story featured on an upcoming video, email it to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I will have a link to my email in the description box below as well. Till we meet again, you know what to do. Stay sinful.